Welcome to our next lesson with ancient Egypt, and what we're going to do today is focus on a part that we call the Old Kingdom. When we talk about ancient Egypt, we're going to look at it from the perspective of there's an old, a middle, and a new kingdom. And there's going to be some pretty neat changes and things that actually occur in this Old Kingdom. We're going to see the emergence of this empire, and it's basically created by a guy by the name of King Narmer, also known as Menes, who is shown in the picture on the right hand side there. Now, Narmer is actually the king of Upper Egypt, and what he does is he actually falls in love with a princess from Lower Egypt, and to prove his love for her, he essentially goes and invades Lower Egypt and conquers it. Now, once he has control, he basically becomes what is called one of the first emperors of ancient Egypt. In the picture on the right-hand side there, it's very common that most pharaohs wear some type of headdress. And this headdress is essentially a signal of power, of authority. And as you can see, also there's someone kneeling before him. You know, this is a symbolism that he is in control. He is the person who is going to determine everything, all aspects, control all ways of life. When he unites Upper and Lower Egypt, his headdress actually changes. And it's neat, and I'll show you a picture of that a little bit later on. But if you're an archaeologist, you can determine the different time frame that Menes or Narmer was actually in power by the headdress that he's wearing. Because when he conquers both Upper and Lower Egypt, he actually switches to a dual crown, and he becomes the wearer of two crowns. He has essentially united both Upper and Lower Egypt. Now remember, Upper Egypt is actually in the southern part of Egypt, and that's because of the mountain ranges in South Sudan, in Uganda, and Lower Egypt is closer to the Nile Delta, simply because of elevation changes. Now, some other significant parts to this is when Narmer actually develops or conquers this northern and southern part, he creates a new capital city. And this capital city is going to be Memphis. And it'll stay like this for a while. Eventually, this new capital will then become Cairo. But for now, we're going to look at it as in Memphis. Now, something else that is pretty neat, when we look at this Old Kingdom, we're going to see the emergence of some buildings. And in the picture in the upper right-hand corner there, the one thing that the Egyptians were able to do is they basically took the method of using mud, sun-baked mud, and they constructed the mud. They would put crushed reeds inside to add to stability. But then also there were times when these were basically set on fire. The fire would actually char the outside of these bricks, therefore becoming a waterproofing agent. It wasn't a foolproof method, but it's definitely something that is going to be used by the Egyptians. Now, this Old Kingdom is going to last for quite some time. You know, historians think about 500 years. So it's quite a long time after King Narmer eventually passes away that his ideas and principles and this idea of a pharaoh and what makes up this high-ranking individual is going to continue for some time. Now, in the bottom right-hand corner, there is a hieroglyph of an Egyptian worker. You know, most times Egyptians would farm for sometimes 3-4 months out of the year, and for a large majority of the other months, they are basically building pyramids. You know, when we look at what makes the Old Kingdom pretty unique is the fact that we do see the emergence of a pharaoh. A pharaoh, you could say, is essentially a god, a priest, and a king, all in one. So the pharaoh is going to be the person who's going to make essentially every decision for ancient Egypt. We're also going to see the emergence of a pyramid. And these pyramids need to be some type of resting place for the pharaoh itself. And because the pharaoh is such a high-ranking person, this pyramid needs to be pretty grand. And we'll see later on when we look at some of the pyramids, and when you go on some of the 3D tours and you get to go inside the pyramids of Giza, you'll see why and how long it actually took to build these things. So, the Egyptians, again, they spent a lot of time, building pyramids, and the rest of the time they're going to be using it to farm and to sustain life, because that's what you need in order for this civilization to grow. Now, when we continue on, we kind of look at the actual pharaoh itself. The upper right-hand corner picture there, that's the famous Tutankhamun, otherwise known as King Tut. All right, that was the headdress that is pretty synonymous when we think of an Egyptian pharaoh. We'll have more about King Tut later on. But if you focus on this vertical picture right here, kind of put my cursor over it, that is King Narmer, or Menes. And one thing that I told you to look for is you can see that his headdress now is different. It's not just this single crown anymore, it is the wear of two crowns. So archaeologists can determine the fact that this picture means that Menes or Narmer has now conquered both Upper and Lower Egypt. So it's a neat thing to do, and when I tell you about different things in class, these are some of the things that you can look for. You can look at certain pictures and hieroglyphs and determine when these things actually happened. Now, when Narmer becomes the pharaoh, pharaoh, believe it or not, actually means great house. Let's not confuse that with what a pyramid means. Pyramid is house of eternity. I know that when you think house, we could think of, okay, pyramid, but house of eternity is for pyramid, great house is for a pharaoh. Notice again, we have God, priest, and ruler. That's essentially what the pharaoh is. As you can see there, if you're the God, priest, king, ruler, you are making every decision. Nobody else is going to rule higher, and no one's decision obviously is going to have any more weight than yours. Now, as a pharaoh, some of your responsibilities is making sure the land is well irrigated. That is, are the levees working properly? Remember, a levee needs to be built because the Nile River is going to flood every spring, but you have to be able to control that flood. We're also going to make sure that the canal systems are working properly, and that there are enough basins located nearby so that there is an extra water source. And then most importantly, taxes, right? We still cannot get past this idea of taxes. People continuously had to pay taxes to make sure that the pharaoh, in case Egypt was ever invaded, the pharaoh would assemble a military and help defend that area. And in return, you would provide the pharaoh with some type of riches, a prized possession that you would own, or you would give him some of the crops that you would grow as well. Our next slide is basically just a look at the Nile. When you can see coming down the entire Nile River, I mean virtually 4,200 miles long, you can see that it's a pretty lush landscape, and as you get just around the outside of that, it just opens up to a desert area that's pretty desolate. But the neat thing is, by having your civilization right there in this green area, not only is it conducive for you to live in and to prosper, but it's acting as a barrier of protection from any kind of invaders. You have to travel a great distance in order to get to the Nile River. And as we'll see, we'll talk later on about the Sphinx and the pyramids of Giza, one of the first step pyramids, Queen Hatshepsut. We'll certainly discuss her too. And even Ramses and the Abu Simbel, the monument that was created for Ramses the Great. And then we'll definitely get into the Valley of the Kings, and you can't mention the Valley of the Kings without mentioning Howard Carter and his finding of King Tut. Now, what we're going to do to kind of wrap up this mini lecture is we're going to take a look at the textbook, and one of the things that we need to practice are our non-fiction reading. I know we all love to read our fictional stories, our sci-fi fantasies, but Unfortunately, to enhance our educational experiences and to make sure that we're getting ourselves well prepared for not only high school but college or technical school or any career field, you need to make sure that you understand how to read non-fictional material. And one thing that we want to do is this thing called note-taking and note-making. Okay, let me explain again. Note-taking is direct content from the book that you're reading. Things that you think are important, something that you would typically highlight, but in this case we cannot highlight the textbook, so you can paraphrase it or you can write it word for word. So as you're reading through the chapter, if you think something is important, I want you to write it in the note-taking portion. We as a class will go over this together and we'll kind of compare our notes. When you have the note-taking section complete, what I want you to do now is focus on the column on the right, the note-making part. This is where you can kind of transfer this information over to a long-term memory. The way that you do it, ask questions. Make connections. If you can make a connection to something that you already know, it's going to increase the probability that you will remember this new fact. Well, like I tell you in class, you should never try to cram for a test. When you cram, it goes in short-term memory, and chances are you're going to forget it. But if I ask you your date of birth, your home address, or your telephone number, things that you use on a daily basis, you can recall those things 10 out of 10 times, no matter what you're doing. And the reason is that is now ingrained in your long-term memory. So if you can make those connections, if you can take this new information and connect it in a way to new information, it is going to help you. The questions that you ask, I don't expect you to immediately find the answer, but we should go in and we should actually look at that information and try to find out, to give ourselves a deeper understanding of the content. Okay, so take some time now, read through chapter 4 and start taking notes. When you're done the note taking for chapter 4, let's move into the note making part, and when I see you in class tomorrow, we will compare our notes and help make the connections together. Thank you.